Hi, welcome to another podcast by the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space. The Global Network was created in 1992 to prevent the arms race from moving into space. It's a tough job, but we're staying on it. You can support the show by clicking on the like button and also subscribing to our YouTube channel so that you'll get notifications when we do new videos. And also check out our website, spaceforpeace.org. I'd like to thank our Global Network board member, Will Griffin, for doing the tech work to make these shows possible. Our guest this time is Pat Elder from Maryland, who's a longtime activist on the PFAS issue. Welcome to the show, Pat.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Bruce. I appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about PFAS, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances.
Well, let's take a moment and briefly introduce yourself and tell us what PFAS is and how you got started on this issue, please.
Sure. My name again is Pat Elder, and I'm the director of military poisons, and we've been active in most of the states and about a dozen countries. And our shtick has basically been to test surface waters draining from military installations. And I've been on this since 2017. I've kind of been in Washington, D.C. my whole life, and have been part of the anti-war scene in D.C. And so, helped to organize lots of big demonstrations with, United for Peace and Justice and DC Anti-War Network and a lot of them. And I mean, we did manage to get several 100,000 people on the street. I was usually like the guy that would, take care of the porta potties or the permitting with the police and that kind of thing, But hey, even if you get a couple 100,000 people on the street, it doesn't really change policy much. We found that, of course, with George Bush. I look for other ways to go about fighting this deep state empire, however you want to define it. We all struggle with that definition. And I got into, countering recruitment a bit. I wrote a book on military recruiting in the United States. And heck, got a legislation introduced in the state of Maryland that tried to, stop lead ammunition from being used in the high schools cafeterias. So, thought that was pretty low-lying fruit, but struck out with that, and that was in 2017. That's the same year I heard Pat Hines, up there in Western Mass. We were in a conference together in Minnesota, and I was talking about military, contamination, and she spoke of burn pits and PFAS. It was the first time I'd ever heard of it. It really turned my head, and I read a article that year, or maybe it was 2018, by Tara Kopp of Military Times, and the title of the article was "Why Women Were Told Don't Get Pregnant at George Air Base," and hundreds and hundreds of women were coming forward in this Facebook page, speaking of hysterectomies and just horrible health problems associated with what they think was, drinking PFAS. So that's how I got into it, and being pretty obsessive and compulsive, I stuck with it. And
well, I guess it's a good thing to have. And sometimes, especially on an issue like this that is very, very heavy and hard to understand, right?
Right. Yeah. And, I have, an MA in education and in research, and no expertise in science, mind you. And so, but it may take that kind of special combination where I'm able to take pretty complicated scientific things that I don't understand and give them to smart people I know.
Well, let me ask you this. We hear the term forever chemicals. It's scrolling across the bottom of the screen right now. PFAS is a forever chemical. What does that actually mean? A
Well,
brief,
yeah, it was 1938, and DuPont chemists in New Jersey mistakenly in the laboratory combined fluorine and carbon and brought them together and created a bond that is the strongest in all chemistry. Chlorine, fluorine and carbon together are the strongest bond, and they repel grease, they repel fire, and they repel water better than any substances ever made. Problem is, once the two combined, it is nearly impossible to get rid of them. Now, there are, and it's exciting, scientists in Japan, in both Tokyo and Yokosuka, seem to think that if you get the PFAS up to about 1800 to 2000 Celsius, you can break it apart, destroy it. Unfortunately, most of our incinerators are operating about half that. So anytime you hear about the incineration of PFAS, we're in trouble. But that's the thing that people don't seem to be able to get their heads around, that the stuff doesn't break down. So, if you've had a spot where they've been training with firefighting foam in one crater for 30 years and using, gallons and gallons of the stuff, biweekly or monthly, then that means your soil, your subsurface soil, your water, your air, your groundwater are contaminated forever.
does
And
that
so,
mean you can't remediate PFAS? You can't ever effectively clean it up? I was at a hearing, a town hearing here in Brunswick after the recent PFAS spill, and I was talking to a Department of Environmental Protection by DEP from Maine,
yeah.
and he was saying that they don't have any information about remediation. And I wonder, is it even possible?
Well, it depends on what you're talking about. We can remove virtually all of the PFAS in our drinking water. So you can take a relatively mid-sized city and look at the room that you're in terms of the cubic footage, and you can fill that room with granular carbon, granular activated carbon, GAC. And then you can bring water through that several times and into adjacent structures and come out with clean water. I mean, this is possible. And that's why, my focus has always been on the food, especially the fish, because I've tested the water here in Maryland and found 1.2 parts per trillion near Andrews Air Force Base, or Joint Base Andrews, but where the fish have 94,000 parts per trillion. Fish aren't regulated, but the water is. That's my entire shtick. But in terms of remediation, okay, I am right across the creek from the Webster Field Annex of the Patuxent River Naval Air Test Center. Sounds lovely. And it's about 1,800 feet of deep salt water between here and Maine. And they used firefighting foams for 30 years. And so I get the foam on my property every day, as do everybody else on the cove. But I've taken water samples up and down this creek. Now, this is just one small creek, relatively speaking. But I would say there's about 9 or 10 linear miles of sandy beach. It's all contaminated. All of the sediment is contaminated. All of the invertebrates are contaminated. The crabs, the oysters, the fish, just in this one creek, okay, are completely contaminated. Not to mention the greater St. Mary's River, a river no one's even never heard of, but it all empties into the terribly contaminated Potomac. The point is, how are you going to do it? How are you even going to begin to clean up the scale of something so frightening? And so right off the bat, the entire dialogue should shift to stopping its use. We need to stop using this stuff. And we can do that. It's going to take a while. It's not simple to simply ban it, but we need to figure out the few uses that we think are absolutely essential and then make damn sure that the chemicals don't get into the environment after they're used to produce such and such.
Great answer. Thank you. Let me ask you about the military connection, the military's role. Talk about that.
Sure. Well, it was 2018, and I had been giving some talks across the country, and I was approached by WILPF people, Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, who immediately saw the issue as a women's issue because these chemicals just wreak havoc on a woman's reproductive system, and they permeate the umbilical cord, they contaminate the unborn, and they go through breast milk. And so they helped me get involved with this. And go ahead, Bruce, restate your question there.
Yeah, what's the military role?
Yeah, so they came to me, Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, and they said, everywhere we read, and this is 2018, we never hear anything about the military. We're always hearing about either, no reference whatsoever, to the source of the pollution, but certainly nothing regarding the military. So we combined forces. They helped fund me. And I began researching just the military, and I realized that it is a fantastic comparison, because the military, although the dots on the map, I should say the dots on the Environmental Working Group's PFAS map, that is a site for your listeners and watchers to see. Go to the Environmental Working Group PFAS map. You'll see, there are many dots across the country where PFAS is either produced or spilled or is in the environment. Get rid of those dots and you're left with the military dots, and there's about 800 of those. They make up the bulk of the contamination because of the concentration. And you see it recently in Brunswick, and you've seen it in Loring. Loring is something that folks in Maine have not been paying attention to.
You're referring to Brunswick, the community I live in Maine, that recently at the airport, former Naval Air Station that closed down some years ago.
Yeah.
They had a release of thousands of gallons of PFAS out into the environment, and they're now struggling to figure out what the hell to do about it. And this was inside of one of the hangars. It escaped the hangars and was carried by the winds as foam all over the place. And now they have, in other hangars, they have big supplies of PFAS that they're worried about having that released too. And you also mentioned Loring, which is up in the very northern part of the state of Maine, a former Air Force base that's been closed down, that has also been contaminated by PFAS.
Yep.
So talk more about the situation in Brunswick and Loring, if you will, to kind of shine a light on it.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. Well, first off, in Brunswick, there has been some confusion. These overhead suppression systems, that were installed in hangars 4, 5, and 6, typically involve giant containers of concentrate, AFFF, that is aqueous film forming foam, and the concentrate mixes with water, and then it is put through a blower that makes the bubbles. Okay, so if you took Palmolive and put it into a bucket that already had water in it, it would still be liquid. But if you use a high pressure hose before you were getting ready to wash your car, you'd have lots of bubbles. It's the same concept at play. But anyway, at Brunswick, you had 1,450 gallons of concentrate mixed with 50,000 gallons of water. And that's where we saw, the highest concentrations ever publicized regarding the release of these contaminants into the environment. I've never seen anything like it. I mean, we had 3.8 billion parts per trillion. I mean, it's mind-boggling considering that the EPA had an advisory up till last year that said 0.004, in drinking water, was a danger. Now the EPA says 4 parts per trillion, that drinking water should not exceed 4 parts per trillion for two types of PFAS, PFOS and PFOA. Sorry, I know it gets confusing for people, but you've got PFAS in your groundwater, in the hundreds and hundreds of thousands, and it's supposed to be limited at 4. You got a big problem, and it never goes away. And what I've seen in Brunswick is almost like there's a template being played out, and I've seen it. I've seen it in Germany. I've seen it in Korea. I've seen it in Japan. I've seen it in Hawaii. I've seen it in California, several states in the United States, Florida, Maryland, where it's being played out. It's a sophisticated game here, but the public will gradually lose interest. It will gradually fall off of the headlines, and the public will be treated to releases from your Department of Environment that basically make light, or not make light, but diminish its significance and say that the levels are okay. And we see that with reporting in the Androscoggin. Like Ed Friedman has done miraculous work, and so has Martha Spees. Both of them have done unbelievable work. And the three of us were testing water at the, where the Brunswick Sewer District pours into the Androscoggin almost 4 years ago. We were there. And, it was reported by the papers. But they said that, our testing methodologies might not be correct. And so they dismissed it. And there was no follow-up. But we sounded the warning about the contamination, and no one listened to us then. That's where we are.
Let me ask you this about dust. Let me first say that this former base was contaminated with many, 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 many kind of contaminants when the Navy was there. When they left, there was some minimal cleanup, but they left our community a place that was still a mess. And then they created a authority. The state created an authority, redevelopment authority, that began bringing in businesses and homes, people buying up land, building homes. Former base housing was converted into, civilian housing. And so they call this place the Landing now in Brunswick. And this contamination, at the time of this recent accident, spread to daycare centers and many other places as this foam was carried by the wind and all over the place. I remember one mother at the hearing saying, my kid goes to this daycare center and there was this PFAS foam on the playground equipment. Is it safe for them to go out there? And one of the so-called experts said, yes, just take a clean wipe and wipe off the equipment and it'll all be fine. But I read that you mentioned dust, and it really got me thinking as I'm watching the summertime power mowers, these big riding mowers, industrial size. They're out there mowing the grass and blowing dust like crazy. We hadn't had rain in quite a while, and the dust was going everywhere. And I'm wondering, is that PFAS, as they're mowing the lawns out there on the Landing, is that stuff spreading? Can you answer that question?
I can. Yes, it is spreading, and yes, it is a disaster, and yes, human health is threatened, and human health has been threatened since people were allowed to move in after the Navy took off. The chemicals are horrendous, and they are deadly, and they include trichloroethylene and PCE and vinyl chlorine and They're at alarming levels. But back to the PFAS. There was a study done by the CDC in Martinsburg, West Virginia, 4 years ago. And Martinsburg does not have the level of contamination you have in Brunswick. Brunswick's worse. But anyway, they tested several homes that were adjacent to the base, outside of the confines of the Army National Guard base in Martinsburg. And they found dust with 13,900,000 parts per trillion of PFOS and 16,500,000 parts per trillion of PFHXS. Now, I don't expect your viewers to be able to wrap their heads around that, but we don't want ingestion of these carcinogens in our body. And we know now, and there have been plenty of studies to document this, that the babies, toddlers especially, crawling around on the floor, get the dust on their hands and it goes to their mouths. This is the number one way that PFAS gets into the bodies of babies. They're already born with the PFAS because, as I said, it travels through the breast milk and through the placenta. And so this just adds to the problem. But these are just disastrous levels. And so it is incumbent on your state apparatus, your Department of Environmental Protection in Augusta, to get with the program. They like to pretend they are, and they've fooled you into thinking they are. But there was a fish, for instance, not to get too whack about this, over 1 million parts per trillion in Loring, and they reported that 10 years ago and buried it in a report. It never became public. I mean, I've reported on it, but hey, I've reached a couple thousand people.
Now they're talking about testing hypersonic missiles up at former Loring Air Force Base up in the northern reaches of Maine. This, fueling missiles, we know about contamination in rocket fuel that leaks into the local aquifers. That's a problem all over the country. And so anyway, this whole escalation, if you will, of military technology in our state and everywhere else that the United States has bases around the world is literally, killing us all. They say that they're creating this huge military to protect us, but in fact, in the process, they're literally killing us, aren't they?
Correct. Well, let me pass a little bit of math by you, Bruce, because I think the mathematics here, as far as the fish contamination is concerned, is crucial. And I got to tell you that the European Food Safety Administration, EFSA, figures that up to 86% of the PFAS in our bodies is from food, especially fish. Keep that in mind. Not so much about the drinking water. When the Brunswick authorities tell you your drinking water is okay, it probably is. That's not the source. It's never been the major source, as much as we're told that it probably is. But in Loring, okay. So recently, just a couple of years ago, long after the Air Force took off from Loring, the Maine Department of the Environmental Protection found 8,770 parts per trillion of PFOS in streams leaving Loring. That's trouble. It's huge trouble. PFOS is one of 16,000 kinds of PFAS, okay? But it's really a bad one because it bioaccumulates tremendously in fish. The EPA says that PFOS bioaccumulates in fish at 4,000 times the concentrations in the water. So if you got more than 1,000 parts per trillion in the water, you're liable to have fish with more than 1 million parts per trillion in the fillet. And you do. That's the math. And that same math holds true for Brunswick and every place across the country. And we see it. We've had We've had fish at Northsmith Air Base closed 30 years ago
That's
with
Michigan, right?
10 million parts per trillion of fish.
That's
And
in Michigan, right?
yeah, it's in Michigan. I mean, you know, this is the story. This is the threat to human life. And the press has done a lousy job. You know, I was a liaison with the National Academies of Sciences. We tried to get them to do two things. One, tell physicians what to look for and give physicians an idea of how people might be sick and how they might be exposed. And then have physicians create a markers, what, you know, to look for PFAS in blood serum, and then be able to diagnose from that. And they did. So now there are blood tests you can take, and 7 different types of PFAS are examined. If your blood's above 2 parts per a billion, you should have yourself screened for several different diseases. Above 20, you should have yourself screened for many conditions. You're in serious trouble. The people of Brunswick should all have their blood tested, and it should be done at the expense of the state. But back to the math, EPA says you can look at PFOS in the water multiplied by 4,000, and that's how much PFOS you can expect in the fish.
All right. Let me ask you this. We only got a couple minutes left.
Sure.
Would you say take the last few minutes and talk about what you found on your trips overseas? Give us a general idea.
Yeah, I will. I've been spending much more time on Japan than I have Maine, I can tell you. And I've been spending more time on Japan than I have anywhere in the US, because I kind of realized after our first trip there, you know, and I've been writing on Japan for 4 years and have really made lots of contacts over there. It's a whole different game. I mean, here, I'm hated in Maryland. I can't even access my local college where I graduated back in '77. I can't get an honest hearing. When I, tested water here, it was made fun of. I couldn't get anybody to report the story. A Japanese firm came here and reported 6,000 parts per trillion in my water here from the Navy base. The Washington Post, New York Times, Baltimore Sun weren't interested in the story. I go to Japan last year, and we got 50 newspaper stories and television interviews. 50. And we had a list of requests in Japan. Hey, you may want to start testing your sewer water, your wastewater treatment plants. You may want to start testing blood. They were the 2 big asks, and we have that happening at prefectures across Japan. There was just an article 2 days ago about Iwakuni, where the Marine Corps base is, and they're testing water and they're taking other environmental samples there. This is what activism can create. And so, again, you are in close to the belly of the beast. I am in the belly of the beast here in EPA Region 3. And I just see much greater movement in Japan. The Japanese mind, the Japanese technical ability, man, let these people get their heads around it. Their political process is pretty contaminated with money, but it's not as bad as ours. We're not going to get anything done here. Our executive and legislative avenues of redress are largely foreclosed. It is the judicial route where, hundreds and hundreds of attorneys are making a lot of money. We have 8,000 cases regarding PFAS in a line in U.S. District Court in South Carolina. It is a train wreck, but not in Japan. In Japan, there is hope. And once the Japanese get a hold of this, man, they're going to run with it.
Let me ask you, we got about a minute left. Is it the military-industrial complex that is blocking the way here in the United States?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that the DoD dictates environmental policy any way it wants to. It has a trump card, and it runs the show. And you can call it deep state, you can call it DoD, anything you want to give the name to. But you look, the EPA has says, hey, keep it under 4 in groundwater. And all around the country, we have several hundred bases where the levels are in the hundreds of thousands. And there's no enforcement and there's no cleanup. Yes, I would agree. It is the military industrial state. Be careful, Bruce. They're going to be contaminating outer space.
That's for sure. They already have been for years. Very quickly, where can people get more information about this? What's your website?
Well, I would go to 2 of them. First, ours, militarypoisons.org. Will tell you a great deal about the impact the U.S. military is having, and then the other is the Environmental Working Group. Just Google EWG PFAS, and they're a trusted source. There are others: PFAS Lab, Northeastern University, Harvard School of Public Health, Sierra Club. Yeah, there's a bunch.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Pat. Keep up. Don't get discouraged. I know you're stubborn, and that helps. So keep rolling.
Yeah, I really got the Japanese, man. The Japanese. Japanese. I think I'm turning Japanese.
All right. Thank you very much. And thanks for watching another edition of Space Alert. We'll do another show soon with another leader in the anti-war, anti-imperialist peace movement from another part of the world. Until then, good luck to you all, and please get organized. Bye-bye.